I can only tell you that if you just focused on one thing, like if you just sold popcorn for the next 3 years and did nothing but become the best popcorn guy or gal in your area, you'd probably get to 7 figures. The problem is most of us get that shiny object syndrome that pulls us in multiple directions. And like the old Chinese proverb says, if you try to chase two rabbits, you'll catch neither. So the old phrase, focus stands for follow one course until success. I know it sounds hokey, but that's kind of true.
Hey everyone, before we dive in, I am super excited to talk about our new sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at YCharts, and they have some exciting times ahead. They just announced that their latest product enhancement called Proposals has now been rolled out. YCharts Proposals is a game-changing capability empowering wealth management professionals with the prowess to craft captivating narratives, effectively conveying their investment strategies that help win new business. But at the end of the day, that's not all. Coming up on September 22nd, be sure to mark your calendars because YCharts will be hosting a webinar to unveil Proposals and show off its full potential. You'll learn how to whip up reports that don't just highlight the value of your investment strategies, but also cater to your clients' unique financial needs. Click the link in the show notes to register for YCharts' webinar if you want to learn more about Proposals. And based on our affiliation, you can get 15% off your initial subscription when you start your free YCharts trial. And just to be clear, this is for new customers only. Again, I can't be more excited about Model FA and YCharts collaboration and hope to see you on the webinar. Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSell here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And we are joined today by Mark Willis, who's a CFP, and he is a man on a mission to help you think differently about your money, your economy, and your future. He's a certified financial planner, a 3-time #1 best-selling author, and the owner of Lake Growth Financial Services, which is a financial firm in Chicago, Illinois. He's also a co-host of the Not Your Average Financial podcast. I know a lot of folks listening either have a podcast or thinking about a podcast, so definitely go and check his out. And on that show, he shares some of his strategies for investing in real estate, paying for college without going broke, and creating an income in retirement that you will not outlive. He also works with people who want to grow their wealth in ways that are safe and predictable to become their own source of financing and create a tax-free income in retirement. So with that said, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David, for having me on.
Of course. How long have you been doing the podcast, by the way?
Well, we're like great grandparents in the space. We started in September 2017.
Damn. All right. So a solid 6 years or so.
Yeah. My first interview was with like George Washington and John Adams and the rest of the crew.
Very nice. So how'd you get started in the business? Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that you didn't graduate college and then, start Lake Growth Financial Services. There's probably some steps in between. So what was that journey like?
Well, thank you. Yeah, the work we do today sure doesn't look like what I thought I'd be doing out of college. We work today with folks all over the country, real estate investors, business owners, people who just want to take some more control over their financial future. We've had the great privilege recently of helping a lot of people through these difficult times with inflation and with rising interest rates on their HELOCs and home mortgages. And we've been working to help them become their own source of financing, be their own source of financing, like become their own banker in essence. So that's what we do now, but rewind the tape a little bit. And I was in debt up to my eyeballs. I just graduated. The private school that we had graduated from was not cheap. And we had $120,000 of student loan debt and we had no jobs. We were graduating in the midst of 2008. So I don't know if you remember what was going on in the economy around then, but not exactly a great time to be looking for work. So it was a tough couple of years, man. I'll just tell it to you straight. My first job was I was working at a property management company, shoveling snow and, cleaning out the stuff from under elevators, stuff you never want to think about, and so it humbled me quick. And it also got me really focused on this thing called money, which I'd never paid attention to, really. And so I worked also part-time in a CPA firm. And I was listening to her make these calls to her clients. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Client. I know you're 63 years old. I know you're 61 years old. I just lost you half your life savings. Whoops. And that really got me freaked out. Like I almost left the business of finance. Like I didn't want to go any further. Hearing that kind of message. Thank goodness I stayed in it though, and stumbled across some strategies while I was there that opened my eyes, both personally, how to deal with money, how to think about money in a way that was so counterintuitive. It just changed everything about how I approach money. And then also it changed my family's money and my family's tree's money, beyond me, multiple generations. So it's literally changed everything about how I handle money. And it got me so pumped up that I said, I need to get this word out. I need to tell the world about this. So we opened up our firm, Lake Growth Financial Services. And we started in Chicago. We now have clients in all 50 states and many countries around the world. And we have a number of advisors and associates that are colleagues of ours and work with us in our firm. And it's just been a great ride ever since.
That's awesome. It's cool too to hear stories about, people, doing odd jobs, beforehand, kind of making it work and then finding, even more success and, taking a bet on themselves, quite frankly. So it's excellent to hear that. Now,
look, you're an entrepreneur. You know that the greatest, and as a financial planner, I can say that you are your greatest investment. I mean, you have more, I mean that in a very practical ROI sense. Like you probably get a better ROI in your business, David, than probably any of your mutual funds. I'm just guessing.
Certainly.
And so that's a good thing for us to pay attention to as financial planners, and not to just besmirch the entrepreneur, and to tell everybody to just throw their money in a target date fund seems like bad advice most of the time if they have the entrepreneurial bend like some of our clients do.
Yeah, I agree. So there's a handful of topics that we're going to go through today. I want to hit on, how you've been able to get to seven figures, on a consistent basis. We also talked when we first connected about choosing a target market and how to position yourself to those folks. One topic that I'm really excited to go through, because I have strong beliefs around this as well, is getting someone who you don't know and that doesn't know you all the way up to raving fan status. And then ultimately, if we're going to be meeting these people, targeting these people, how do we make sure that they actually sign on the dotted line and reduce that resistance, when that time comes? So I guess generally speaking, and I'm sure there's multiple components to this, but what would be the top strategies that you've deployed to get up to that seven-figure level and stay there? What would you sort of credit that to?
Well, it's sort of survivorship bias, I guess. There's a lot of businesses that don't make it to seven figures. Those that do, I would say it's hard to know what was really the success and what was just happenstance, or, what's causation, what's just correlation. So it's going to be really hard for me to just say, here's the magic formula to get to seven figures. It doesn't exist. Don't listen to anyone who says it does. They're not telling you.
I thought there was 7 key steps that everyone.
Sorry to say. Yeah, exactly. I can only tell you that if you just focused on one thing, like if you just sold popcorn for the next 3 years and did nothing but become the best popcorn guy or gal in your area, you'd probably get to seven figures. The problem is most of us get that shiny object syndrome that pulls us in multiple directions. And like the old Chinese proverb says, if you try to chase 2 rabbits, you'll catch neither. So the old phrase, focus stands for follow one course until success. I know it sounds hokey, but that's kind of true. If you just, I don't care if you're, again, popcorn sales guy, or if you're starting a complex holistic financial planning firm, if you can be laser focused on exactly what you're here to do on earth to do, you'll have success in your interpretation of that word. Whether you get to seven figures or or you just have an abundant life in other ways, let the focus be the mission, and don't let other people tell you what to do with your life, because there are people whispering in your ear for your attention. In fact, I'll even say that the more important currency than money is your attention. Your attention is actually the currency that matters more than the money in your bank account. Attention is something that we invest. We pay attention. It costs us attention when we are distracted, whether it's an ad on TV or keeping up with the Joneses or our social media feed or trying out that really cool new branch in our financial planning firm. I've been pretty good at this index fund stuff, but I'm going to go chase, real estate for a while. If you can just stay focused on who you are and what your mission is and what your voice is to the marketplace, you'll be successful and you'll reach your own potential, whatever that might be.
So let me ask, with Lake Growth, when you first started, or let me ask this question differently. You mentioned in the opening that you have other advisors at Lake Growth. Are those folks that basically plug into your platform and have the ability to sort of like build their own thing, or are they employees of the firm where you're segmenting clients to them? What's that setup like?
We have two different tracks. One is what we call the in-house track, and one is the out-of-house track.
Why didn't you call it the outhouse track?
Outhouse. I did actually, but no one liked that one. They didn't like the way that sounded. So yes, yeah, you're thinking the way I was thinking, man. Yeah, the outhouse track. So there's in-house and out-of-house track, and the in-house track is kind of like you say, they wear the brand of Lake Growth. They're working with our clients. They've got access to our staff and our systems and all that. And then there's the outhouse track. And they are, in essence, running their own business. And I do mentoring and feedback and guidance. I show them our templates, that they get to cover their own expenses. They wear their own brand. They hang their own shingle. They are their own boss. They're in business for themselves, but not by themselves, as the old saying goes. And that gives them the freedom and autonomy that they're looking for. And so we've got a mixture of both. And I like that. I kind of like the different rings on the tree, so to speak.
So that leads me to my main question now that I have that context. How long were you in business? Because I would imagine that when you started Lake Growth, your first priority, and I may be wrong, but your first priority was to build up your book of business, figure out the systems and processes. And then there may have been an inflection point where you were like, I can bring on other folks now. Is that a fair assessment of your journey? And if so, how many years in until that inflection point happened?
We were hiring associates 3 years in, just starting the business.
Yep. But what about the advisors that plug in, right, and run their own business, assume their own brand?
That was the next year, I think. So 4 years for them to outside to come on and learn our systems from the outside and kind of rebrand themselves and run their own shop. So another year or so for that.
Cool. So what's interesting about that, as we relate it to what you said about focusing on one thing, I have that belief too, where you need to go all in on something that can support your lifestyle and keep you afloat before you start potentially distracting yourself with other things. And sometimes people would do what you did and maybe then get into real estate or start a software company, or they realize that I can actually build something else, add value to other professionals, other advisors in this case, while still kind of staying in my lane.
Yeah.
Right. So when you think about, there's been, a bunch of things that you see online on social media about 7 streams of income. They don't need to be 7 totally different streams.
Correct.
They can be complementary to what it is you're building now. And I have a client, his name's Jerry, and he was just a one-on-one client of mine, built a successful business. And then almost in like a haphazard sort of way, he now has a couple advisors on his team that are building their own thing on his platform. Mm-hmm. And now he has another stream of income off of, their activity as well. So I just think it's interesting how you can diversify your income streams within the same industry and not
Yeah.
having to totally branch out into something different.
It's great. It's like tributaries into a river. They
Mm-hmm.
should support each other that way. And therefore, you've got a real rush that you can count on one. If one dries up, you can open up another.
For sure. Now, as it relates to target market, I have a philosophy, call it target market, call it, working with a particular niche. And that said, I think that when identifying a niche, it needs to check two, sometimes three different boxes. So the
Mm-hmm.
first box is it needs to be a profitable niche, right? So if you really like working with teachers, that's fine. You're just going to need to work with a lot of teachers to have a profitable business compared to if you worked with successful business owners or physicians or people in software engineering or something like that. So
Right.
the first box to check is profit.
Yep.
The second box to check is passion. So when I was an advisor, I thought that because it was profitable, I was going to go and work with attorneys at large law firms. I started working with attorneys, and I'm like, I can't work with attorneys. So I didn't have a passion in working with them, right? So you need to check the profit box, you need to check the passion box, and the optional box is some sort of natural affiliation, right? So if you used to be insert industry here, if your spouse is a part of insert industry here, if you have a lot of friends, insert industry here, it's not required, but it helps speed things up a little bit.
Yeah.
So that said, Mark, I'm curious to know how that methodology compares to how you think through that. And then also specifically, what are some ways that folks can position themselves to that target market to be a credible source of planning to those people?
Well, you're right. At the beginning, it's just sort of out of a means of desperation and also floundering and trying to find your voice. And there's a power there. And honestly, I don't look down on having to act out of a sense of appropriate hunger to be successful. I don't want folks to have commission breath or fees breath or whatever. I think you need to be serving as if they are your family and only recommending what's in a client's best interest. That said, I think there's an important, constraints drive innovation, something that my wife told me from her art school. So when you are constrained, let's say that you can only paint with your left hand and you're right-handed, let's say, that constraint is going to force you into some sort of innovation. I think that's a really good way to live. Like finding appropriate constraints, you're going to be innovating all the time and you're going to find a way to be successful. More than anything, some financial advisor coach is going to tell you, if I tell you, hey, just pick up the phone book and start dialing, that's not exactly a strategy in today's day and age. But if you are just hungry enough, you'll figure out, and with the right coaching, which we offer through our firm, you'll find all sorts of creative ideas. Here's a case in point. A gentleman I'm training right now. He is just getting started, and he happens to frequent a library where he does some work during the day. And he's got a little room there and everything. And so because he's already there, he's got these nice relationships with everybody there. Everybody at the library knows who he is. And so he's now setting up workshops and one-on-ones and public events and things like that, all because he was already there. So there's this concept, you've probably heard of it, David. It's called iki-gai. It's a Japanese phrase called iki-gai. Have you heard of this? No,
I haven't, but I'm giving you the polite head nod. But
okay, all right, good. Please explain. Okay, polite head nod. I get it. So the iki-gai, it's I-K-I-G-A-I. For those that want to spell this and look it up on Google, I-K-I-G-A-I. It's a Japanese word. It means reason for being. And there are 4 quadrants on this diagram. I want you to imagine 4 Venn diagram, like 4 circles, kind of as a Venn diagram. Okay, got that? It kind of looks like a flower. And the 4 circles are, ready for it? Number 1, what we love. Number 2, what the world needs. Number 3, what you can be paid for. And the last one is what you're actually good at. So I can love painting, but I can suck at it. So I'm not very good at it, but I can love doing it. And the world doesn't need my painting. They don't need it. And I certainly can't be paid for it. So I can't really put painting in my iki-gai. Now, my wife, she loves to paint. She's very good at it. She was actually getting paid for it, doing portraits and so forth for a long time. And so obviously the world was looking for portrait painting and more. And so that was, for a time anyway, her iki-gai. And that's okay to have seasons where you're following certain things. So to answer your question, yeah, you can have a passion for something, but it may not be like, it might check the passion box and the profit box. But if there's no natural affiliation, maybe the world doesn't need you to reach out to attorneys, but maybe there's a specific need for this period of time where you're reaching out to chiropractors. And so this is the idea of iki-gai. Again, one more time, it's what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and finally, what the world needs.
And what other ways? So you mentioned the example of the advisor who's going to be doing workshops and events and things like that based on the connections that he has. What other ways have you seen advisors successfully position themselves appropriately to a particular target market?
This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I'll do a shameless plug and then I'll answer your question there, David. So we actually have a whole online course system that I've created to train new advisors to follow the steps that we've been able to find to get that iki-gai that I'm talking about. But more importantly, a particular track that I see working just phenomenally well. And folks can find me and reach out to me. Again, we can say this at the end of the show too, but it's Next Steps. That's nextsteps.gr8.com. So nextsteps.great with the number 8 in there.com is the site to go to if you want to dig into this and learn more about it. But the answer to your question is podcast guesting. I can't find a more profitable, simple, low cost, and valuable means of speaking to your target market than through podcast guesting. There are millions of podcast shows out there, hundreds of millions of episodes, and people are looking, just like David, thankfully, you were kind enough to have me on today. Guesting on someone else's show is brain dead simple because you just get on and you have a conversation with someone who loves to chat with you, and you hopefully enjoy chatting with them. The power there is you're getting in front of your target audience. You're having a one-on-one long form discussion with people who might just do business with you. And at the end of that episode, you get to share ways in which you might be able to serve that audience. So for example, I love going on real estate shows. So there are a ton of real estate investor shows out there in the podcast space. I go on and I'm the one guy that is not talking about a real estate syndication deal, but I'm talking about strategies to become your own mortgage company to yourself and be your own banker and bank on yourself and take back control of the banking function in your life, not just your real estate banking, but all of your banking. And that intrigues people enough to want to dig into it some more and reach out to us. And we get free SEO out of the deal. The host gets great content that she or he can then share with his audience or her audience. And then there's incredible joint venture opportunities for certain hosts. They want to continue. I've written books with hosts. I've done online courses. We've done workshops and webinars and lunch and learns. The vast majority of our leads, if you want to call that, our new relationships are coming from podcast guesting. All it takes is like a $70 microphone and a real opinion on what, the world is doing right now and where your bold opinions lie and what your clear and compelling message is to a world that's desperate to hear it.
Love that. And then on the flip side as well, let's say you do a weekly podcast that you host. So let's say I work with people in sales. Okay. I may not do a podcast about financial planning. I may do a sales oriented podcast to speak about sales strategies, sales principles, marketing, things like that. And I would bring on sales professionals, top sales professionals, to interview them, understand what language they use, how they, what their process looks like, things along those lines. Not only are you adding value outside of the scope of what it is that you get paid for, but you also are meeting, if you do a weekly episode, you're meeting 52 people over the course of a year that's in your target market. So I like the idea of being a guest, but I also like the idea of having your own platform, because it's a creative and ethical way to get someone to hang out with you, so you can start to build a relationship, and then there's maybe business or collaboration, behind the scenes as well. So podcasting from both angles.
Both angles. I totally agree with you, and it's a great way for folks to date you before they marry you.
Exactly.
In terms of becoming your client, whatever. And I'm sure that's at least a part of why you're doing your show. I hope is to help grow your influence and help folks to know you and that sort of thing. So it really works. It will come and go. It's like all things in the marketing space. There's no permanence in this, but it's a long lasting trend. And if you stick with it, if you're consistent, like we've been doing our show, we're at 300 plus episodes now. And I've been on over 250 other people's shows, which is phenomenal to think about. But I just am really proud and glad of the whole team that helps put all that together for us. But it's allowed us to build a real relationship with people who are strangers, and they truly do become raving fans. It's so strange. You probably have this experience too, David, but they'll say things like, I can't believe I'm talking to you. Or, wow, is it really you? Or, hey, I've been listening to almost all of your episodes and I'm almost caught up. And what did you say on this one episode 6 months ago about this topic or that topic? So I'll give a quick story and then I'll hush. We were starting the podcast right after a blizzard in Chicago because I was so sick and tired of going out to these workshops that I was putting on, spending thousands of dollars to do. And then the weatherman decided to dump, 3 feet of snow on us and ruin the event. And so I said, all right, we got to start putting stuff online. We got to start recording this. We got to put it on podcasts. And ever since, it's been a lot of fun. So I'd say definitely take a look at that as an option. That's one of the courses that we teach in our online courses at that nextsteps.gr8.com is how you can do that in a way that is sane and helps you build a platform.
Yeah, it's and that kind of leads well into the next topic about, strangers to raving fans. And before I tee up that question, it's interesting where maybe the first solid year, we barely, outside of guests that we bring on that we either partner with or bring on as a client afterwards, we didn't get any clients from the listeners. But after that first year is when we have a pretty steady stream of folks that book calls, for coaching, for marketing, that we provide to them as a result of the podcast. And what's so interesting is when they hop on the call, they're in buying mode because they already spent 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 hours with me in a leverage manner. And then when they hear, like you said, my voice on the phone, it's like, oh, wow, this is the person who's hosting the podcast, and there's some credibility there. And it makes the sales process a heck of a lot more condensed and a heck of a lot more smooth. So I guess my question would be it with a podcast or otherwise, what are some tactical things that an advisor can implement to get someone from stranger closer to raving fan?
Well, just, I would say that's a great question. Tactically speaking, I will just say one thing and then answer that question. I'd say that the kindest thing you can do with your potential clients is to give them something that they can take at their own pace. Asynchronous learning is the future. We don't just sit around now there's a value to getting in the room together and brainstorming and hashing it out live, but asynchronous is kinder to our busy schedules. And if you're looking to work with people who are, successful, if you don't want to just have people who have no assets, you probably are going to be working with busy professionals. And so be kind to them by giving them some content that they can consume on their own schedule, where they don't have to travel 45 minutes to a library in the middle of a blizzard. like was my strategy. Okay.
Mhm.
So the kinder mode, and that also takes, as you said, the pressure off of you having to do a song and dance for somebody because you've just met them and they've already built a trusting relationship with you and they understand your perspective and they believe in many of the same bold opinions you might have. And by the way, you've repelled everybody who doesn't have that opinion. So you're filtering people who shouldn't be coming to work with you just by the nature of you having, a presence online or a podcast. As far as tactically, again, focus, focus, focus. Follow one course until success. If it's Friday morning, there's going to be a new episode of Not Your Average Financial Podcast in everybody's players. That's just as sure as the sun rises, as close to that as possible, right? Yeah. Being human beings and all. So there will one day be the end of the whole podcast game and we'll all be done here. The last episode will be aired and that's going to be the end of it. But until then, we're going to keep this game rolling. As long as people keep listening, we're going to keep publishing content. And doing that tactically means scheduling time on your calendar every single week, a couple hours a week to really block out that time to write that content, to put it all together, to give it some thought, to bring on great guests, to really promote it on the platforms that you're on and physically talk about it when you're talking to clients. So that's the tactical. Make it a central part of your entire process. Be an educator first. And that means having your playlists and your email threads, putting it into your templates, making sure that your content is deliverable on multiple modes, not just listening to it, but also on YouTube, also written as an article, summarized. AI is doing a great job of summarizing our transcripts now, so we can do a great job of rewriting it as a simple blog post. We also have an online community where folks can dialogue about the content. So in addition to our podcast, we have a private, not on Facebook, private social media site that we've created where we've got hundreds of our different clients on there and listeners of our show. And they talk about the episodes. Hey, this was cool. Or, hey, I had a question about that. So engaging people on a very practical level like that is, I think, super crucial in this day and age, especially if you're comparing yourself, being compared by your clients and potential clients against your competitors. I always say you don't have a competition except with yourself and what your potential is.
I think too, and I know we've kind of focused on the idea of podcasts and content, but what's cool about leveraging that strategy is not just from the perspective of being able to advance client relationships, because essentially you're able to spend more time with them, which I'll hit on that point in a second, but spend more time with them at scale. But it makes you a heck of a lot easier to refer, right? So if a client has a friend, rather than putting you in an email right away, which I think under normal circumstances would be an ideal scenario, instead they can invite them to the community, right? Invite them to listen to the podcast. And some would argue that starting there, consuming content, is a more ideal scenario than just getting introduced to you right away, because they're going to feel like they already know you before that first call. So they're getting primed, so to speak. But to come away from the tactics and get more conceptual. So let's just say, I'm totally making up these numbers, but let's just say for someone to go from stranger to raving fan, and the trust building process, like a lot of folks say, well, trust takes time. And time is certainly a component, but let's just say, hypothetically, it takes 15 specific touch points with a person to get them from stranger to raving fan. Okay. Assume that to be true. If you spend 3 years and you do 5 touch points a year for 3 years, and you're at that 15th point. Okay. And let's just say that equals trust. Whereas if you have 15 touch points in a 4-month period, and the end of that game is trust, you can sort of bend time to your favor, because trust is not just based on time, it's based on the accumulation of experiences. The challenge becomes, a lot of advisors that I work with hear that and they're like, oh my gosh, how do I don't want to be annoying. It's like, well, you're not reaching out and having 15 meetings over a 4-month period. You're helping them with what you're paid to help them with. Mm-hmm. But also, you should be the keeper of ideas and information. So if you know that they really love, I don't know, gardening. Maybe you send them a blog randomly. Hey, came across this blog about gardening, this and that, wanted to share it with you. Maybe you spend $5 and you send them a pack of seeds that they can add to their garden. Maybe you send out an email with a picture of your family vacation and ask if they're traveling this year and where they're going. They don't need to be annoying touch points. It's just, let's hang out, let's get to know each other, let's pay attention, let's give a what, right?
Yeah.
About each other. So from a conceptual point of view, I think trust is based on the accumulation of experiences, but we can condense those experiences to speed up the time in which it takes to get them to trust you and become a raving fan.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think you're right. And there's something about there's a blend of consistency and spontaneity that I think creates the organic relationship. You need consistency. Hey, every Friday I'm going to drop that episode, but you also need that spontaneity. Oh, what's this pack of seeds doing in my mail? I love that.
Yeah. I haven't heard it framed like that, consistency and spontaneity, but I think that's very powerful. So that said, before we start wrapping up, one of the last topics, how do we reduce resistance when it's time for the client to sign on? So we had an intro call, maybe they've consumed some content, we had a discovery call, and at whatever stage of the process, it's like, okay, let's make this official. How do we reduce that resistance? How do we get them to not be tire kickers or indecisive or chasing down paperwork? How have you buttoned up that process?
Well, you're right about trust. I think that should be already baked in before you get to that point. If you're relying on some slick close, you're not going to do very well in the long term, and you're going to have upset people, and you're going to be upset too. So, don't rely on the closing and that moment. In fact, there is no resistance when there's true trust, when you've already educated them. I like to give all of our clients a quiz. I force them to tell me that they know what they're doing here. Like, I ask them particular questions about the specific financial strategies we deploy and employ for different clients. I want to hear them tell me where the keys go, where the brakes are, on this financial vehicle we're building together. So that changes the game. If you're always selling, then you're never buying. And I want to always be the buyer in my relationship with clients. If you're buying them, then you're not selling to them. Meaning, if you're checking them out to see if you want them as a client, then you're not going to be getting that commission breath I talked about earlier. They should be proving to you that they're worthy of working with you. It should not be a big sales game where you're trying to show them the whiz bang wow features and benefits. Let them be selling you. And I do that through quizzes and jumping through hoops, through reading through my content and listening to my show. And I want to hear that they know what they're doing before we move forward. And I've stopped the whole meeting before. Hey, it looks like you don't really know enough yet. Let's do some education today. No problem. You might have been busy. There could be personal stuff. Let's spend today really getting answers to your questions and researching some more before I go through all my spreadsheets. What good is a big spreadsheet if we have no clue what it is or how it works? So I would say that's one way to reduce resistance. And the other piece is, again, all conflict. Someone once taught me that all conflict at its root, David, is just unexpressed expectation. So get deep into, before you get into proposing and strategies and recommendations, figure out what their expectations are. Get them to express their expectation of what it means to have a financial advisor and what that cadence of engagement looks like and what sort of engaging they're talking about. Are they wanting an email every Tuesday? Are they wanting to be checked in on every 10 years? What are their expectations? Because all conflict at its root is just unexpressed expectation. That's a writer downer for the business, but it's also a writer downer for your marriage if you're married, or friendships or parenting or whatever. Unexpressed expectation, root of all conflict. Check that out. Give that some thought. I'd say that's a way to kind of reduce resistance, is to help them clarify what they really want, which is something very few people can actually do.
On that note, and I agree with all that. On that note, the other saying that always stuck with me as it relates to conflict is, let's say there is conflict because maybe we didn't set proper expectations. The saying that stuck with me is conflict when handled directly and sprinkled with some grace can ultimately build relationships.
Yeah.
So if there is something that goes wrong, own it, be graceful about it. And oftentimes those can be your biggest referrers, because if you don't take ownership, they're going to totally change their mind about you. But if you own it, you fix it, and you do so gracefully, it can actually benefit the relationship. Don't do it on purpose in terms of creating conflicts, but if you find yourself in that situation, it can actually have a positive outcome.
Conflict, when handled directly, taken ownership with, and then sprinkled with grace, can build the relationship. I love that, man. That's a good one.
Appreciate it. Well, Mark, this has been wonderful, and I do want to pivot. With all of our guests, one of the things that we ask them is a book that's had an impact on them, and it's my way of, quite frankly, getting book recommendations from myself, but also to help distill a reading list, of course, for everyone listening to the show. And the book that you chose, I can see you looking for right now, with all the books that you have. And I actually hadn't heard of this, so it's by Keith Cunningham, and it's called The Road Less Stupid. Why'd you pick that book?
Well, I think I loaned it out. That's the worst part about good books, Yeah, it's by Keith Cunningham. Great book, incredible wisdom. Just he's got this weird Southern draw to his writing style, but I just love his approach, and he's very proverbial when it comes to like business management. Great for maybe trouble with staff or with bad service with your other businesses, that your vendors that you're working with. It's just a great book for helping you learn how to think. In fact, there's the first 2 chapters are just helping you build a discipline of thinking time, like a specified time where you're there to focus on just one problem in your life or your business. And he gives very practical steps on how to actually think. And there's a great quote by Woods Hutchinson, who wrote for the Saturday Evening Post a long time ago. He says, I think it's like 10% of people think, another 10% think that they think, and everybody else would rather lay down and die than think. So be a part of the 10% that actually thinks. It's a rare commodity. Our brains are incredible for coming up with ideas if we give them the space to do that.
Well, I think too, because I've found myself in this situation where I've sat down to think, and it's like crickets, or then you have, the random thoughts, that kind of come in. It's almost like trying to meditate for the first time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get distracted. And the best way to become better at meditating is to meditate. The best way to be better at thinking is to think. The best way to become more patient is to do things that require patience, right? So lately, I've been setting aside time to think. And it's just amazing to see how much more productive it gets every single time through that repetition, through that practice. So I'll have to check out that book and learn more of a structure and guideline that he puts forth, to see if that helps even further. So I'll scoop it.
Great.
Cool. Well, if I'm listening to this and I say to myself, I want more of Mark, maybe I want to consume more of his content, or just stay connected, or see how, they can work with you. Where should I go if I'm listening to this and I want more of you?
It's been a pleasure being on your show today, David. Thank you. The website, if you want to get to know me and work with me and partner up with me in some way, or just learn more about how we could partner up together, go to Next Steps. That's let me see. Let me make sure that's singular or plural. Let me just get that pulled up. Sorry. So that's Next Steps, plural, nextsteps.gr8.com. So one more time, that's nextsteps.gr8.com. That's a quick little site where you can learn more about working with Lake Growth Financial Services, whether you're in-house or out-house, I'll call it, and setting up your own practice, but not all alone, or in-house if you wish. That's nextsteps.gr8.com. Our podcast is called Not Your Average Financial Podcast. If you want to get to know some of our strategies and how we work with clients all across the country. That's notyouraverageFinancialPodcast.com.
Awesome. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure. I wish you nothing but the best. I hope this isn't our last time connecting. Maybe there's some collaboration opportunities between us at some point as well. And for everyone who spent the time listening to this episode, we appreciate your time and your attention as always. And we'll catch you on the next one. Mark, thanks for joining.
Thank you.